I'm really excited about this opportunity to be able to finish up the series today. And I don't know what comes to mind when you think about fully alive. We said right in week 1, we had this idea that, maybe skydiving or maybe, bungee jumping, that makes you feel fully alive. For other people, it's kind of like, that is as close to fully dead as I ever want to be, right? I'm probably not allowed to tell the story, but my brother went skydiving. He bought skydiving as a gift for one of his birthdays. And about a year and a half ago, he went skydiving. And you saw the lady who went skydiving, she gets a video at the end. Apparently that's like part of the package. Anyway, my brother's video is really short because he jumped out of the plane and about 2 or 3 seconds into the jump, he passed out and only woke up sort of, as the parachute sort of, I'm probably not supposed to tell that story, but I love my brother, he's fine. But the video is really short, and so he jumps out and, hey, are you still alive there? And he's like, anyway, so it's not for me, okay? I'm certainly not going to be doing that anytime soon. But his video was really short. That's kind of, So I don't know what fully alive is like for you. But this whole series we've been going through and looking really at one statement that Jesus makes. And it's a profound statement. Jesus makes tons of statements. In fact, some of the greatest teaching. In fact, as you walk through life, you bump into things that you live by or that have been ingrained in our culture, and you don't even realize that Jesus actually said those things. And what we've really done through the series is spend 2 weeks, and we're going to spend again today speaking about this one statement that Jesus makes, and this is it, that the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. And I, Jesus, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And kind of in week 1, we reverse engineered this thing. We kind of started at the back end of the statement, and we started with this one that says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. We spent this idea that, hey, if you want to have a full life, it's available for each and every one of us. That we can have a full life, and it is fully available to every single one of us. But there's a way to get there. There is a path to be able to experience that. And this statement comes at the end of like a really confusing passage about, there's sheep and there's shepherds and there's like these sheep pens, and you don't quite know what's really going on. And then Jesus comes out with this statement, and really the whole idea is that Jesus is saying, hey, if you want to experience this life and have it to the full, I'm the path to get there. There's like good news, bad news. Every single one of us can have it. No matter where you've come from, no matter where you've been, you can have a full life. It's fully available to you. But the only way to get there is through Jesus. And week 1, we sort of talked about this idea that, hey, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've experienced in your life, that Jesus is in fact the pathway. Jesus is the gate to God's goodness. That to get to experience the goodness of God, you've got to go through Jesus. And I don't know what comes to mind for you when you experience this idea of, a fullness of life or God's goodness. When you think about this idea of, hey, what is the goodness of God in my life? You think about things like love and peace and care and, you provided for, all those things. But the great thing is we don't have to imagine what those things are, because the Apostle Paul, who was kind of like a Christian mercenary, whose job was to go and stamp out this religion called Christianity, or became known as Christianity. He eventually becomes a missionary because of an encounter he has with God, and turns his whole life around and ends up planting tons of churches. And he actually gives us this list of what God's goodness is really all about. And he says that he calls it the fruit of the Spirit. And I'll put these up here. He says this, that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. In fact, just out of curiosity, I just want you to look at that list for a moment, and I want you to pick one. If you took one of those things and you applied it to your life, I imagine that your life would be better, right? In fact, just for a bit of participation today, choose your favorite fruit. Not like an apple or an orange, I like one of these, okay? Choose one of these, just quickly, get it in your mind. A little bit of participation quickly. How many of you would have chosen peace? Hands up high, come on. Yeah, because life's not peaceful right now, right? You'd love some peace in your life right now. How many of you would choose patience? Right? You're raising a teenager, right? That's why you need some patience in your life, right? I mean, how many of you would choose joy? Right? Okay? Not a lot of joy in the room today. How about some self-control? Anybody? Food just tastes so good, right? Like, food is just so great. I just love food. I mean, self-control, we could all do. And I think if we experience some of the goodness of God that Paul tells us about, we would be able to experience life to the full. And his point was, hey, you don't get to experience this, part of the time. And this is very important. You don't get to experience joy some of the time. You don't get to experience self-control some of the time. The truth is, and God intended for these fruits of the Spirit to say, hey, you get to experience these all the time. You can experience. I designed your life and designed this whole idea of spirituality. Hey, I want you to experience all of this all of the time. I just don't want you to experience peace occasionally or joy occasionally. I want you to experience all of them all of the time. That was kind of what we discussed in week 1. But week 2, we kind of said, hey, there's a flip side to this whole thing. And that was the first part of this statement. It says, the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. That there is this thing, this, and Jesus calls it a thief, that comes along and it steals, it robs us of the opportunity to have a life that is fully alive. It kills every chance we have of ever getting to that point. It maybe destroys the opportunity we have in front of us to be able to go and experience life and life to the full. And when I spoke about this last week, you think about this idea of the thief in your life. We all know what the thief is in our lives, right? The moment I talk about the thief, something that's robbing you in your life, you know exactly what that thief is, right? You're like, well, I birthed it. I'm raising it. This thing is sucking the life out of me. I just can't go there. I'm maybe married to it. I'm living in it. I commute to it. This work is just, it's robbing me of life. I drive it every single day. You've got some things in your life that are robbing you, literally sucking the life out of you. They just take too much time. They take too much energy to be able to keep going. And those things are good reasons, and they might be robbing you physically of joy in your life. They might be taking those things away from you, patience and all those things. But all of those things aren't really the whole part of this idea of getting to God's goodness. That's not the total thief. In fact, it's kind of symptomatic of like an underlying virus that each and every one of us have in our lives. And the truth is, as we kind of looked at last week, this idea is the thief really is our unbelief. Now, it took me 35 minutes or so to get there, okay? So I can't explain that to you again now, so you really should go back and have a listen to that message from last week. But the truth is that it's sometimes our unbelief that God says something and we're like, I don't fully trust you in that. Our unbelief in what God says about our lives and about the things that we experience in life, even this idea of being fully alive, that Jesus has come to give us full life. Sometimes our unbelief in those things is what's holding us back. That's really thieving us from being able to experience a life and life to the full. But the truth is, fully alive is fully available to you, and it's fully available to me because of what Jesus has come to do. Now, as we've been talking through this series, I realize that there's something that's come up for many of us, and it's kind of like, hey, Morgan, it's great to be able to talk about this idea of being fully alive. In fact, I think that, maybe fully alive is maybe possible, and you certainly, explained to me that there's something that I'm supposed to experience in my life, which is a life that is fully alive. But, is it really available? Is this life that is fully alive, is it really available? Morgan, I understand living fully alive would be an amazing, amazing thing. Like, experiencing all those, kindness all the time and love all the time. That would just be amazing. But is it achievable? Living fully alive part-time would be better than no time at all, right? I just want to be able to experience fully alive part of the time. And I think we would all disagree with that statement because we'd prefer to experience fully alive full-time, right? We prefer to experience this life to the full all of the time. We'd love to experience love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. We'd love to feel all of those things and experience all of those things all of the time. But the truth is, we'd prefer to experience fully alive full time, but our experience keeps changing all the time. If you go through life, if you could just, your life's going bad right now, and you finally get to a place where you can experience peace in whatever you're experiencing. And then something else bad happens, right? And then you're like, I've just found peace. Like, come on, just give me a break, right? Or maybe you experience joy in a season of your life, and then in another season, you just don't experience any joy for a long period of time. The truth is, seasons are always changing in our lives. As soon as we get comfortable in a season, as soon as we feel like, I'm finally experiencing the fruits of the Spirit, or now I'm finally experiencing these things that I've lacked for so long, life changes again. Like, if we could just try and, just get these things all together and be able to say, is there some consistency in life? If I could hold life constant for a while, I might be able to experience life that is fully alive. You experience joy in one moment, and then there's this other situation that comes up, and it's robbing you of the joy suddenly. Maybe you're experiencing self-control in a moment, then you get to the buffet, and they've got 5 different types of cake, and you're like, why? You've experienced different things. Life is constantly changing, and it's moving all around. And if we could just find life to be constant, if we could get some things that were consistent in our lives, we might be able to experience fully alive. But the truth is, it's always, always changing. In fact, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we might say this, that the fruit of the Spirit feels more like the fruit of our circumstances, right? Like, if I'm feeling peaceful right now because I'm experiencing peace in my life. But you asked me that question 6 months ago, I probably wouldn't have felt that way. You know, I'm experiencing joy right now, but, you know, that's because I'm in a season of joy. But I'm not experiencing any kindness in my life. I'm not experiencing any self-control in my life. It kind of feels like, well, if it's in season, if this fruit is in season, I'm experiencing that in my life. If my circumstance right now allows me to experience love and peace and joy, then I get to experience those things in my life. The truth is, it's very difficult to maintain a season of fruit because the season is always changing. It's never consistent. We're never able to experience what is going on in our lives because life is always changing. Life is a way of throwing curveballs at us all the time. And if we could just figure out how to keep life constant, then maybe we could experience fully alive all the time. And so, Morgan, is fully alive really available all of the time? And so today, I want to kind of have us unpack this question. And the question is this: how can we ensure that the fruit of the Spirit is always in season? How can we ensure that this thing that Paul talks about, this goodness of God that I can experience through Jesus, how can I ensure that those things are in season all the time? No matter what I'm facing, no matter what circumstance I'm going through, how could I make sure that I'm experiencing all of those fruits all of the time, that they are always in season? Now, I think that this is a deeply spiritual question. I think that, you know, if we're going to discover fruit of the Spirit, I think it's a very spiritual question. And so we should certainly ask someone who is deeply spiritual. And I think probably the most spiritual person that's ever lived is Jesus. Because on one hand, he is fully human. And on the other hand, he is fully God. He's like God in a bod on this earth. And we get to experience him through the writings of the apostles and those people who are eyewitnesses of seeing Jesus here on the earth. And something that was amazing about Jesus is Jesus, I mean, hands down was amazing, but he could predict the future. But he could predict his own future as well. And we say jokingly all the time around here as well, like, hey, if you meet someone who can predict his own death and resurrection and then pull it off, you should just believe whatever he says, right? We jokingly say that from time to time. I can't believe that because he's probably one of the only people who've ever pulled it off. I think he's probably the only person who's ever pulled it off. But, you know, anybody who can do that, he's predicting his own future. And he realizes he's sitting around this group of people, and this situation that we're going to read about today, it only happens between Jesus and the disciples, which is a unique experience in itself. But he's sitting there, and he's looking at this ragtag group of guys, and he's like, at some point, I'm going to be gone. Like, not dead, because, again, he's coming back to life, and, you know, it's going to be cool. But after a couple of weeks, he's going to ascend to heaven, right? But he realizes that there's a lot riding on the shoulders of these guys. Like, they've got to kind of start the church. They've kind of got to launch the church. That, you know, I'm leaving this earth, and this group of guys is going to be able to carry on what I'm doing. And so he's like, well, I want to be with them if they want to be with me. But how do I explain this to this group of guys? Because this is going to be confusing. I mean, even explaining this to me, you kind of going, Morgan, you already got me confused. I realize that. But he's like, hey, I need to teach them somehow that I want to be with them, even though I'm not physically with them. That I'm with them in spirit. I'm with them wherever they may go, even though I'm not physically with them, that I'm not here anymore. And I think that, you know, when you visit Jerusalem, there are vineyards all around Jerusalem, and he's probably walked through the vineyards. Maybe they're sitting in the vineyards. I don't know. But, you know, it just adds a little bit of richness to understand this, that he's maybe standing out there, and he points up at the vineyards as he tells this parable, this story. And he says this, that I am the true vine. Jesus saying this. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Now, quick side note, this is completely for free, has nothing to do with the message. But when Jesus says, hey, I am the true vine, all of the guys there go, what? Like, are you allowed to say that? Like, oh my gosh. Because they had grown up as little Jewish boys, and they had realized that Israel was the vine. That if you wanted to experience the goodness of God in life, you had to, in fact, be born Hebrew. You had to be born into the Jewish nation. That was the way that you experienced the goodness of God. And Jesus comes along and says, no. This whole thing's changing. And so when Jesus says, I am the vine, these guys are like, whoa. Like, are you allowed to, in fact, say that? And Jesus is like, this whole thing's changing. It's not about birthright. If you feel like you can get into good graces of God just by being Jewish, that's changing. That's not how it's going to be anymore. You're going to get there by belief, not by birth anymore. And so things are changing. That's free. You can tell someone later. That's a lot of fun. I'm the vine, Jesus says, and my Father, God, He's the gardener, right? He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Now, I've just got to be honest. I'm not a farmer, but I did grow up on a farm where there were a whole bunch of vines, okay? So I'm going to try my best to explain to you what I know about vineyards and pruning and all of those things. So if I get some of it wrong, you can go ask the Google, and the Google will be able to help you out a little bit more. But there's a very big principle in this that I think every single one of us could certainly apply to our lives. What's interesting about the vine, and especially the vineyard, is the gardener, the farmer knows that there's something happening to the vine, and if the vine's goal is to produce fruit, if you want a plant, a tree, a lemon tree, whatever it is, if you want a plant to produce flowers or you want it to produce fruit, one of the things you've got to do is you've got to be taking care of it, right? A good gardener, a good farmer takes care of what is happening with regards to his fruit. And Jesus says, hey, one of the things that's interesting about the vine is that there are things always happening around the vine. In fact, the seasons are always changing around the vine, right? At some point, you've got a ton of water, and it's rain season, and they may be drowning. And then the other season, there's like a drought, and the vines experience no water, and they've got no water there. There's cold nights, and there's warm days, and there's like tons of sun. Maybe they go through a week, and there's like very little sun. There's maybe no sun at all. So the seasons, literally the seasons, but the conditions around the vine are constantly changing. And you get dead branches and you get live branches on this bush as well. And what's interesting about the whole idea of this vine is that everything comes down to nutrition at the end of the day. Like if the plant is healthy and you can keep the plant healthy, then it's going to be able to produce fruit. And so you've got the good gardener knows that, and people who do this, they're in the know. They know what's going on. They're able to look at this branch and okay, if there's a dead branch, I'm going to cut the dead branch off. Because if there's a dead branch on a vine, I do know this. The only thing it's good for is what? It's firewood. It's the only thing a dead branch on a vine is good for. It's the only thing. In fact, it casts shade, it throws shade onto the other parts of the plant. That's where that saying comes from, of throwing shade. It doesn't. I just presume it does. But throwing shade onto the other plants. So the gardener, the farmer knows, hey, I'm going to cut that off, because it's shading, it's throwing shade, it's not allowing everything else to get its nutrition that it needs in that. The other thing about a dead branch is, you've got to cut it off because it's stealing some of the nutrition away from the plant. In fact, if you've ever seen someone who's pruned roses, you know that they go to that bush, and as soon as that bloom has been out for like a couple of days, they cut it off. Why? I mean, it's a beautiful flower. Why would you do that? The truth is that bloom is already stealing nutrition away from the plant to be able to produce more flowers. When grapes come to, when they ripen, they're ready to be taken off, a farmer comes along and he takes those grapes off. Why? Because they're still taking nutrition away from the plant. They're still taking nutrition. Even though they don't need it anymore, they are still taking nutrition away from the plant. So it's kind of inhibiting its ability to be able to produce more fruit. See, the reason they take off even healthy branches on a plant, the reason you prune a healthy branch is because it is taking too much nutrition to try and create this new branch that's happening when it could be producing a flower or could be producing fruit. And so if the goal ultimately is to produce as much fruit as possible, a plant produces more fruit when the nutrition is directed to fruit production. And I know you didn't come to church to hear that, but it's very important for what we're about to talk about. The whole idea of a plant is if producing fruit is the goal, if we're going to be trying to create fruit on the plant, the best way to get there, the best way it's going to be able to do that is all about providing and keeping that nutrition available for producing that fruit. That when all of that nutrition is directed at the fruit, we're going to be able to produce the most fruit along the way. And so Jesus, again, in his wisdom, comes along and he says, hey, this is really important. And all those guys sitting there are like, hey, I grow my own food to be able to survive, like to eat and provide for my family. I know how this works. And Jesus is making a great illustration here. And next he says this, remain in me. Maybe in a different translation you heard live in me or abide in me. But remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. He carries on and says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. apart from me, you can do, what's that word? What's that word? Nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And he does this great illustration where he says, you understand how the vine works and that everything's about nutrition. And to be able to produce fruit, if a branch wants to produce fruit, that vine has got to be able to give that branch nutrition to be able to produce fruit. And so a branch can't disconnect from the vine and be like, hey, I've been producing fruit for like 5 years. I'm going to be okay. Thanks very much. I don't need you anymore. I got this. I'm going to walk away and try and produce fruit by myself. No, it can't. Because what's going to happen? It's going to die. It's going to wither. And what's it good for? Firewood, right? That's all the branch is actually going to be good for. But if a branch is able to stay connected to the vine, it's able to produce more fruit. It's able to able to get that nutrition from that. And the gardener comes along and he prunes and he picks and he makes sure that, that all the nutrition that's in that plant is being directed at creating that fruit. You have to stay connected. This branch has to stay connected to the vine. It has to be able to get in there. In fact, some of you have experienced this in your life as well. Some of you have gone through life and you'd be like, well, I've been going to church for a while. Maybe I need to disconnect from church and I kind of step away a little bit. And suddenly you realize along the way that, hey, things aren't going well for me. Or maybe you bump into something and you're like, I'm not so sure disconnecting was a great idea. And then there's this return that happens as well. And sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long, but we experience that as well. Now, I think this illustration would have worked really well if we were all in Stellenbosch, maybe, in the winelands, and we were all sitting there teaching. If Jesus was here today, I think that, all got on a bus and gone out there and he could have taught the same thing. But I think if Jesus was here today, he might have taught this a little differently to us. I think he might have had a look at all these devices that we have and, all of our phones and had a look at this thing and gone, this thing's pretty powerful, right? I mean, just think for a moment. Some of you might have no idea about this, but a couple of decades ago, the amount of power that we have in this little device, the amount of battery power that we have in this device, just a couple of years ago, it would have taken something as big as this room to produce the same amount of power. It probably would have cost the same as this room as well. But, it's amazing that this little thing has that much power in it as well. In fact, I don't know about you, but you know that this phone, you can communicate to people in 14 to 15 different ways. You can text people, you can send messages to people, you can send emails to people, you can phone people. Do you know that some of you have no idea that your phone can actually do that? Did you know that? Your phone can phone someone. No one does that anymore, right? You send voice messages all the time. It can phone people. You can have a conversation with someone with this device. It's amazing. Then there's other things it can do. It can take photos. I don't know, a couple of years ago, there were these Polaroid cameras, and then it was always blurry, and there was too much light, and all kinds of stuff going on. That's how we survived. But this thing has got a camera on it, and it's amazing. It has the most amazing pictures been able to take on here. And I think if Jesus was here today, he would kind of be like, hey, this thing's amazing, but I just want to give you an illustration. If you took this phone and you kind of were like, if I continue to use this thing for a while, what happens to it? It dies eventually, right? Ask any teenager right here on the front row, right? They play Candy Crush all day long, and it's just the thing eventually dies. It's amazing how that happens. And manufacturers know that as well, right? They take a phone, and what they do, they build in reminders to you. You get to 20%, and you're like, hey, I think you should choose low power mode, or I think you should plug it in. There's a warning here that you're going to, and you just keep playing Candy Crush, and you just keep going, you push through that, because you're like, I've still got 20%, I'm okay. And you get to 10%, and then it gives you a stern warning. It's I really think you should take low power mode right now. And sometimes, if we don't plug it back in, if we don't take the time to be able to connect it back to the power source, what happens? It dies, right? It ends up dying. Then it becomes a brick, right? That's all it's worth for. It's worthless to any of us. There's no point in even having this, because if we disconnect, yes, we're going to be okay for a little while. We're going to be okay for, a couple of hours. Maybe our battery might last a day, depending on how long we play Candy Crush for. But, eventually it's going to die. And if you do not plug it back in to the power source, it is going to die. And it's going to become worthless. It's going to lose power. We have to stay connected. Some could say that, this phone is very fruitful. It's very powerful, but it's fruitful as well. If we want to be able to produce fruit so we want to be able to use it, we have to stay connected to the power. Yes, we can remain on our own for a little bit. It can go, disconnected for a little while, but ultimately, it has to be reconnected and it has to be charged. It has to experience a source of power, otherwise it is going to die. And it's the same with Jesus. In fact, I would maybe say this: we remain fruitful when we remain connected. That if we want to be able to experience fruitfulness in our lives, we have to remain connected. And some of you know, hey, I might be able to disconnect for a while, and I can go out and I can experience life and I can go through life, and you're fine on your own for a little bit. But eventually life catches up with you. And it's because you disconnect from the power source. Because life has a way of catching us off guard, right? It has a way of throwing us a curveball. And when we're connected to the power source, when we're connected to Jesus, when we're connected through this way, we're prepared for those moments. We can experience life in those moments, maybe fully alive, because we're prepared. We are connected to the power source. It's not going to drain our battery too quickly. But when we're disconnected, it's so much more difficult to be able to find the fruits of the Spirit, to be able to find fully alive in the moments. You see, because when you're connected, you're prepared for it. When you disconnect, you're not necessarily prepared for it. And some of you, I've got to admit, maybe you know someone like this. Some people eventually, they pull out a group, they stop serving, maybe they stop attending churches regularly. And what happens? They're fine for a while, but then life happens. And they're not connected to the power source. And suddenly, road becomes pretty bumpy. And some of them are able to come back and be able to plug back in. But some of them aren't. And some of them end up falling along the wayside. They wither, they die. And we don't get to see them again. We have to stay connected to the power source if we want to be able to experience life fully alive. Now, when I say that, this idea of remaining connected, I don't know what comes to mind for you. When I talk about this, when I was writing this down, I was like, it kind of feels like what they used to talk about in Sunday school for me, and this is just how I was raised. They talk about this idea of a spiritual discipline. And a spiritual discipline kind of has a negative connotation because it's discipline, right? But at the same time, it also feels like a chore. And I don't know what this might feel like. Remaining connected might come to mind for you. But it kind of feels like a chore, right? It's like something you have to do. And I also felt like I was certainly raised like this. I felt like if you weren't up before the sun got up and doing your spiritual discipline, your life was just going to go off the rails, right? The sun's allowed to sleep a little bit longer, but you can't. You have to be up doing a spiritual discipline. Honestly, it felt like a chore for me growing up. Maybe it kind of felt like, hey, if you miss a day, your life is just, you're just taking life in your own hands. You are just, hey, God, take the wheel. I don't know what's going to happen right now. I don't know what comes to mind when I talk about remaining connected, but it was never meant to be difficult. Remaining connected with God, remaining connected with the church, it was never meant to be hard. It was never meant to be difficult. In fact, I want to say to you, hey, there's two really easy ways that you can do this. It's this: talk with Him and read about Him. That's as simple as it is. To remain connected, you can talk with Him and you can read about Him. That's as simple as it is. And the Christian word for talk about Him is prayer. And I love this, especially in church environments. I don't know if this has happened to you. Maybe it does. I lead a community group, and one of the most interesting things that I experience in a group, even in a meeting sometimes, but specifically in group, we always end our time at group off with prayer. And so I'll sometimes, from time to time, I don't do it all the time, but sometimes, and I love my community group, okay? Just before I say this, I sometimes say to my group, hey, would anyone love to pray? And it's eyes to the floor, everyone's don't pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me. And someone's like, I think my child's calling me. You don't have children. Well, I think there's a child calling me right now, so I don't want to pray, don't pick me, right? That's what happens. We kind of feel like there's this, we've got to get a certification in prayer, right? We've got to go through this course, and we've got to use all those ancient pronouns of these and thous, and there's a formula, and if we get the formula wrong, it's just going to be bad. Prayer can be intimidating, right? But it wasn't meant to be like that. It was never meant to be this thing where it's actually, I would say this: you can't fail at prayer. Okay? You can't fail at it. It's like having a conversation with someone else. In fact, if you want to know two things you can do just to start praying, just to talk with him. If you want to know two things you can start doing. One, you can say, hey, God, I'm thankful for this. And then I'm thinking about this. I'm thankful for these things in my life. And I'm thinking about these things in my life. Because when we're expressing to God what we're thankful for, we reckon that, hey, God's providing these things for me. And when we're telling him, hey, I'm thinking about these things right now, I recognize that I'm dependent on God for what's going on in my life. That, hey, I'm going to tell you, hey, I'm thankful for these things, but I'm thinking about these things as well. I'm thankful for these because I know that they come from you. And I'm thinking about these things because I realize I'm dependent on you for what's happening in my life. The other one is read about him. And read about him is there are all kinds of places we could probably read about God, and some books are better than the others, but we have the Bible. And the Bible's a great place to be able to read about God. But the Bible as well is like, the size of like the entire Lord of the Rings series, or like, depending on the size font you have, maybe the whole Harry Potter, series. I don't know. It just feels like it's a really thick book, and it's really, really intimidating. But it's not meant to be. And I just want to kind of disarm you maybe. The book that we call the Bible is simply 66 ancient documents. That's all that book is. It has covers, and it's really just 66 ancient documents. And it's history, it's poems, it's a whole bunch of prophets. There's some songs in there. There's some narratives. There's kind of the life and times of Jesus. There's, the beginnings of the early church. There's all those things in this book. And if you want to try and if you want to try and get reading and you want to read a little bit about him, one of the things I'm going to say to you is you don't do this with any other book, okay? I just want to say to you, don't start at the beginning. Genesis is great, okay? You're going to read Genesis, you're maybe going to get to Exodus, and then you're going to get to the rest of it, and you're going to be like, what? What's going on right now? None of this makes sense. So I want to say to you, hey, we've been reading out of John. So why don't you just start with John? And you don't have to read the whole book of John today. You don't have to read it by Thursday. That's not the goal. Just read a little bit every single day. Just read a little bit every single day. Start with John, then maybe you want to move to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Maybe you want to read about Paul. Maybe you want to, maybe you want to go back all the way to Genesis then after that and be able to read about what is going on there. And Paul wrote nearly 2/3 of the New Testament, and it's just letters to the early church. There's some great information in there that you can read about. In fact, one of the great things about our devices nowadays is that it's made it that much easier to be able to read the Bible. I have an app on my phone, maybe some of you do as well. It's called YouVersion Bible app. It's a great resource to be able to just read the Bible. And the best thing about it is you can tell it to set a push notification to your phone, and so it can remind you at a certain time every day to read a little bit of the Bible. It can send you a verse that you can read every single day. In fact, you can share it with friends. You can have friends remind you that, hey, you haven't read today. It's a really great app that you want to be able to do. But, as great as that is to talk with him and read about him, one of the things I want to just try and give you as a simple reminder to do these two things is, hey, what if every time, because you have to plug this thing in, otherwise it becomes worthless, right? What if every time you plugged your phone in, it was a reminder for you to talk to him and read about him? Every time you plugged your phone in, every time you plugged it in, hey, I need to talk to him and I need to read a little about him. It doesn't have to be a whole chapter. It can just be a few verses. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It can be really that simple. What if every time you plugged your phone in, you were like, hey, God, I'm thankful for this phone. I'm thankful I have electricity. I'm thankful I have my family, my friends. And God, I'm thinking about these things. I realize I'm dependent on you. What if, as a reminder, every time we plugged our phone in, that we would talk to him, and that we'd read something about him? Now, before, I do have to give you one warning about this. We need to talk with him, and we need to read about him. But there's one warning that I do need to give you, because it can derail our entire connection with Jesus. It can completely break down the connection we have to remain fully alive, and it's our pride. And pride is very difficult to see in the mirror sometimes. You can see it in someone else sometimes. You can't necessarily see it in yourself. But when we begin, in our pride, when we begin to think about what's going on in our lives, we begin to think that the good results we're experiencing in our life are as a result of us. That we begin to see some good in our life, and we're like, oh, well, I'm experiencing joy, I'm experiencing peace because of something that I have done. And what it happens is we end up disconnecting from Jesus. We disconnect from God because we think these good results we're experiencing in our life come from us. And it's dangerous because in our pride, we disconnect ourselves from Jesus. And the truth is, every single one of us, whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, when it's a bad time in your life, what do? You cry out to God. Even if you don't believe He exists, you cry out to God. God, I'm going to pray. I don't know that you're real, but I'm going to pray anyway because this situation I'm in right now, I need some help. Even just in case, I'm going to pray. Right? But it's the secret to this whole thing is when you are seeking God in the good times, when you are remaining connected in the good times. That's the secret to be remaining fully alive all the time. That you're remaining connected during the good times, that you're experiencing the fruit of the Spirit. And I got to admit, like we spoke a little bit about this last week, but God has a way of pruning us, right? And sometimes we need to forgive someone else. And that takes a little bit of effort, right? Sometimes we experience some pruning in our lives as it relates to our finances, maybe as it relates to our environment at home. Maybe it's about ourselves, and there's something in our character that needs pruning. We all experience pruning in our lives, and it can be difficult sometimes. But God does those things so we could produce more fruit. That it's all about nutrition in ourselves, and if we can cut something off here, maybe we'd produce more fruit. The secret to it all is that in the good times, we need to be remaining connected. We need to talk to Him. We need to read about Him. I just want you to imagine for a moment what it would be like in your life if you experienced love, not just to love the people that are lovable, but to love those that were unlovable. What if you experienced kindness in your life, that you could show kindness to anybody around you? What if you experienced self-control, that no matter how many cakes were at the buffet, you could remain on your diet? Imagine what it would be like if you experienced patience and your kids have trashed the house again, or they've done that thing again, and you could experience patience with them in that. What would your life look like if you were able to experience the fruits of the Spirit? Jesus comes along and He says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And fully alive is available to you. Fully alive is available to me. Fully alive is available to every single one of us. And fully alive is available to every single one of us full time. Only if we remain connected to God. Let me pray for us. Father God, thank you that really the opportunity we have, no matter what we've done in our lives, if we've run away, we've been able to stay connected. Father God, that you're standing there with arms wide open, that we can return to you. Father God, that we can reconnect. And that, Father, you sent your Son to give us life and give us life to the full, that we might experience a life that is full. And Father God, that's fully available to every single one of us all the time, but only if we remain connected. So Father God, I pray for a person here, maybe they've tried reading the Bible, maybe they've tried praying, and it just hasn't become a routine, or it just hasn't become something that feels comfortable for them. Father, I pray that you would help them just say yes and push through whatever it is that they may be experiencing in that. Father God, I pray that as we strive to remain connected to you, that you would just give us, something that, hey, this is all going to be worthwhile. And sometimes it's so difficult because for some of us, it becomes a matter of pride because we think that the things that are going good in our lives are from us. Father, everything that is good in our lives comes from you. And we want to thank you for that. Father God, so I pray for the wisdom to know what to do with this. I pray for the courage to ultimately go and do that we might pick up a Bible, that we might sign up for YouVersion, that we might be able to go read about you and talk to you about the things that we're thankful for and the things that we're thinking about. Because, Father God, remaining connected to you is the way that we experience life fully alive, that your Son Jesus came to give for each and every one of us. It's in His name we pray. Amen.